The Trial by Franz Kafka. Someone must have been telling lies about Joseph Gay. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but one morning he was arrested. Every day at 8 in the morning, he was bought his breakfast by Mrs. Grabach's cook. Miss Grabach was his landlady, but today she didn't come. That had never happened before. Kay waited a little while, looked from his pillow at the old woman who lived opposite and who was watching him with an inquisitiveness quite unusual for her, and finally, both hungry and disconcerted, rang the bell. There was immediately a knock at the door, and a man entered. He had never seen this man in this house before. He was slim but firmly built. His clothes were black and close fitting, with many folds in its pockets, buckles and buttons, and a belt, all of which gave an impression of being very practical, but without making it very clear what they were actually for. Who are you? Asked Gay, sitting half upright in his bed. The man, however, ignored the question, as if his arrival simply had to be accepted, and merely replied, You rang? Anna should have bought me my breakfast, said Gay. He tried to work out who the man actually was, first in silence, just through observation and by thinking about it. But man didn't stay still to be looked at for very long. Instead, he went over to the door, opened it slightly, and said to someone who was clearly standing immediately behind it, He wants Anna to bring his breakfast. There was a little laughter in the neighborhood room. It was not clear from the sound of it whether there were several people laughing. The strange man could not have learned anything from it that he hadn't known already. But now he said to Kay, as if making his report, It is not possible. It would be the first time that's happened, said Kay. As he jumped out of bed and quickly pulled on his trousers. I want to see who is that in the next room. And why is that Mrs. Grabach has let me be disturbed in this way? It immediately occurred to him that he needn't have said this out loud, and that he must to some extent have acknowledged their authority by doing so. But that didn't seem very important to him at the time. That, at least, is how the stranger took it as, he said. Don't you think you'd be better stay where you are? I want neither to stay nor to be spoken by you until you've introduced yourself, said Kay. I meant it for your own good, said the stranger, and opened the door, this time without being asked. The next room, which Kay entered more slowly than he had intended, looked at first glance exactly same as it had been the previous evening. It was Mrs. Grabach's living room, overfilled with furniture, tablecloth, porcelain, and photographs. Perhaps there was a little more space than usual in there today, but if so, it was not immediately obvious, especially as the main difference was the presence of a man sitting by the open window with a book from which now he looked up. You should have stayed in your room. Didn't Franz tell you? And what is it that you want then? Said Gay, looking back and forth from his new acquaintance and the one named Franz who had remained at the doorway. Through the open window, he noticed an old woman again who had come close to the window opposite so that she could continue to see everything. She was showing an inquisitiveness that really made it seem like she was going senile. I want to see Mrs. Gravach, said Kay, making a movement as if tearing himself away from the two men, even though they were standing well away from him, and wanted to go. No, said the man at the window, who threw his book down on a coffee table and stood up. You can't go away when you're under arrest. That's how it seems, said Kay. And why am I under arrest? Then he asked. That's something we're not allowed to tell you. Go to your room and wait there. Proceedings are underway, and you'll learn everything about it in good time. It's not really part of my job to be friendly towards you like this, but I hope no one, apart from Franz, will hear about it. And he's more friendly towards you than he should have been under the rules himself. If you carry on having as much good luck as you've been with your arresting officers, then you can reckon on things going well with you. Okay? Kay wanted to sit down, but then he saw, apart from the chair by the window, there was nowhere, anywhere in the room where he could sit. You'll get a chance to see yourself how true all this is, said Franz, and both men walked up to Kay. They were significantly bigger than him, especially the second man, who frequently slapped him on the shoulder. The two of them felt Kay's nightshirt and said he would now have to wear one that was of much lower quality, but that they would keep the nightshirt along with his underclothes and return them to him if his case turned out well. It's better for you if you give us the things than if you leave them in the storeroom, they said. Things have a tendency to go missing in the storeroom. After a certain amount of time, they sell things off, whether the case involved has come to an end or not. And cases like this can last a long time, especially the ones that have been coming up lately that give you the money they got for them. But it wouldn't be very much, as it's not what they're offered for them when they sell them that counts, it's how much they get slipped on the side. And things like that lose their value anyway when they get passed on from hand to hand, year after year. Kay paid hardly any attention to what they were saying. He did not place much value on what he may still possess or on who decides what happens to them. It was much more important to him to get a clear understanding of his position. But he could not think clearly while these people were here. The second policeman's belly, and they could only be policemen, looked friendly enough, striking out towards him. But when Kay looked up and saw his dry, bony face, it didn't seem to fit with his body. His strong nose twisted to one side as if ignoring Kay and sharing an understanding with the other officer. What sort of people were these? What were they talking about? What office did they belong to? Kay was living in a free country after all. Everywhere was at peace, all laws were decent and were upheld. Who was it who dared accost him in his own home? He was always inclined to take life as lightly as he could, to cross bridges when he came to them, pay no heed for the future, even when everything seemed under threat. But here, that did not seem to be the right thing to do. He could have taken all of it as a joke, a big joke set up by his colleagues at a bank for some unknown reason, or also perhaps because today was his 30th birthday. It was possible, of course. Maybe all he had to do was laugh in the policeman's face in some way and they would laugh with him. Maybe they were tradesmen from the corner of the street. They looked like they might be. He might, but he was nonetheless determined, ever since he first caught the sight of one called Franz, not to lose any slight advantage he might have had over these people. There was a very slight risk that people would later say he couldn't understand a joke, but although he wasn't normally in a habit of learning from experience, he might also have had a few unimportant occasions in mind when, unlike his more cautious friends, had acted with no thought at all for what might follow and had been made to suffer for it. He didn't want that to happen again, nor this time at least. If they were play acting, he would act along with them. He still had time. Allow me, he said, pacing quickly through the two policemen into his room. He seemed sensible enough, he heard one of them saying behind him. Once in his room, he quickly pulled open the drawer of his writing desk. Everything in it was very tidy, but in his agitation, he was unable to find the identification documents that he was looking for straight away. He finally found his bicycle permit and was about to go back to the policeman with it when it seemed to him too petty. So he carried on, searching until he found his birth certificate. Just as he got back in the adjoining room, the door on the other side opened and Mrs. Gribbage was about to enter. He only saw her for an instant, for as soon as she recognized Kay, she was clearly embarrassed, asked for forgiveness, and disappeared, closing the door behind her very carefully. Do come in, Kay could have said just then, but now he stood in the middle of the room with his papers in his hand and is looking at the door which did not open again. He stayed like that until he was startled out of it by the shout of the policeman who sat at the little table at the open window and, as Kay now saw, was eating his breakfast. Why didn't she come in? He asked. She's not allowed to, said the policeman. You're under arrest, aren't you? But how can I be under arrest? And how come it's like this? Now you're starting again, said the policeman, dipping a piece of buttered bread in the honey pot. We don't answer questions like that. You will have to answer them, said Kay. Here are my identification papers. Now show me yours, and I certainly want to see the arrest warrant. Oh my God, said the policeman. In a position like yours, you think you can start giving orders, do you? It won't do you any good to get us on the wrong side. Even if you think it will, we're probably more on your side than anyone else you know. That's true, you'd better believe it, said Franz, holding a cup of coffee in his hand which he did not lift to his mouth, but looked at Kay in a way that was probably meant to be full of meaning, but could not actually be understood by Kay. Kay found himself, without intending it, in a mute dialogue with Franz, but then slapped his hand down on his papers and said, Here are my identity documents. And what do you want us to do about it? Replied the big policeman loudly. The way you're carrying on it's worse than a child. What is it that you want? Do you want to get this great bloody trial of yours over with quickly by talking about ID and arrest warrants with us? We're just coppers, that's all we are. Junior officers like us hardly know one end of an ID card from another. All we've got to do with you is keep an eye on you for 10 hours a day and get paid for it. That's all we are. Mind you, what we can do is make sure that a high official we work for finds out just what sort of person is it that they're going to arrest and why should he be arrested before they issue the warrant. There's no mistake there. Our authorities, as far as I know, and I only know the lowest grades, don't go out looking for guilt among public. It's the guilt that draws them out, like it says in the law, and they have to send us police officers out. That's the law. Where'd you think that'd be any mistake there? I don't know this law, said Kay. So much the worse for you, then, said the policeman. It probably exists only in your head, said Kay. He wanted in some way to insinuate his way into thoughts of the policeman, to reshape those thoughts to his benefit or to make himself at home there. But the policeman just said dismissively, You'll find out when it affects you. Franz joined in and said, Look at this, William. He admits he doesn't know the law, and at the same time he insists he's innocent. You're quite right, but we can't get him to understand a thing, said the other. Kay stopped talking with them. Do I? He thought to himself. Do I really have to carry on getting tangled up with the chattering base of functionaries like this? And they have admitted themselves that they are of the lowest position. They're talking about things of which they don't have the slightest understanding anyway. It's only because of their stupidity that they're able to be so sure of themselves. I just need a few words with someone of same social standing as myself, and everything will be incomparably clearer, much clearer than a long conversation with these two can make it. He walked up and down the free space in the room. A couple of times across the street, he could see the old woman who now had pulled an old man, much older than herself, up to the window and had her arms around him. Kay had to put an end to this display. Take me to your superior, he said. As soon as he wants to see you, not before, said the policeman, the one called William. And now my advice to you, he added, is to go to your room, stay calm, and wait and see what's to be done with you. If you take our advice, you won't tire yourself out thinking about things to no purpose. You need to pull yourself together, as there's a lot that's going to required of you. You have not behaved toward us the way we deserved after being so good to you. You forget that we, whatever we are, is still free men, and you're not. That's quite an advantage. But in spite of all that, we're still willing, if you've got the money, to go and get you some breakfast from the cafe over the road. Without giving any answers to this, officer, Kay stood still for some time. Perhaps he opened the door to the next room, and he even the front door. The two of them would not dare to stand in his way. Perhaps that would be the simplest way to settle the whole thing by bringing it to a head. Maybe they would grab him, and if he were thrown down on the ground, he would lose all the advantages he, in a certain respect, had over them. So he decided on a more certain solution, the way things would go in a natural course of events, and went back to his room without another word, either from him or from the policeman. He threw himself down in his bed, and from the dressing table he took a nice apple that he had put there from the previous evening for his breakfast. Now it was all the breakfast he had anyway. As he confirmed, as soon as he took his first big bite of it, it was far better than a breakfast he could have had through the goodwill of the policeman from the dirty cafe. He felt well and confident. He had failed to go into work at the bank this morning, but he could easily be excused because of the relatively high position he had there. Should he really stand in his explanation? He wondered about it. If nobody believed him, and in this case, would he be understandable? He could bring Mrs. Grubash in as a witness, or even the old pair from across the street, who probably even now were on their way over to the opposite window. It puzzled Gay. At least it puzzled him, looking at it from the policeman's point of view. And they had made him go into a room and left him alone there, where he had 10 different ways of killing himself. At the same time, though, he asked himself, this time, looking at this from his own point of view, what reason could he have to do so? Because those two were sitting in the next room and had taken his breakfast, perhaps. It would have been so pointless to kill himself that even if he wanted to, the pointlessness would have made him unable to. Maybe if the policemen had not been so obviously limited in their mental abilities, it could have been supposed that they had come to the same some conclusion and saw no danger in leaving him alone because of it. They could watch now, if they wanted, and see how he went over to the cupboard in the wall where he kept a bottle of good schnapps, how he first emptied a glass of it in place of his breakfast, and how he then took a second glassful in order to give himself courage, the last one just as a precaution for the unlikely chance it would be needed. Then he was so startled by a shout to him from another room that he stuck his teeth against the glass. The supervisor wants to see you, a voice said. It was only the shout that startled him, the curt, abrupt military shout that he wouldn't have expected from a policeman called Franz. In itself, he found the order very welcome. At last, he called back, locked the cupboard, and without delay hurried into the next room. The two policemen were standing there and chased him back into his bedroom as if it was a matter of course. What do you think you're doing? They cried. Think you're going to see the supervisor dressed in just your shirt, do you? He'd see to it you got a right thumping, and us and all. Let go of me for God's sake, called Kay, who had already been pushed back afar as his wardrobe. If you accost me when I'm still in bed, you can expect me to find me in my evening dress. That won't help you, said the policeman, who always became very quiet, almost sad, when Kay began to shout and in that way confused him or to some extent brought him to his senses. Ridiculous formalities, he grumbled, as he lifted his coat from the chair and kept it in both his hands for a little while, as if holding it out for the policeman's inspection. They shook their heads. It's got to be a black coat, they said. At that, Kay threw a coat at the floor and said, without even knowing himself what he meant by it, well, it's not going to be the main trial after all. The policeman laughed, but continued to insist. It's got to be a black coat. Well, that's all right by me if it makes things go any faster, said Kay. He opened the wardrobe himself, spent a long time searching through all the clothes, and chose his best black suit, which he had a short jacket that had greatly surprised those who knew him, that he also pulled out a fresh shirt and began carefully to get dressed. He secretly told himself that he had succeeded in speeding things up by letting the policeman forget to make him have a bath. He watched them to see if they might remember after all, but of course it never occurred to them, although William did not forget to send Franz up to the supervisor with the message saying that Kay was getting dressed. Once he was properly dressed, Kay had to pass by William as he went through the next room into the one beyond, the door of which was already wide open. Kay knew very well that this room had recently been let to a typist called Miss Burnster. She was in a habit of going out to work very early and coming back home very late, and Kay never exchanged more than a few words of greeting with her. Now, her bedside table had been pulled into the middle of the room to be used as a desk for these proceedings, and the supervisor sat behind it. He had his legs crossed and had thrown one arm over the backrest of the chair.